Hello and welcome to Right Now. It's the calm before the storm, I hope. Tomorrow, the London protest is expected to be enormous. People on the streets in numbers like nothing we've seen before. The June 21st great reopening of society is becoming less and less likely as new variants are plucked out of hats in the industrial north. So the groundwork is being set, at very least, to keep some of the lockdown measures in place until the autumn, when, of course, the great rebranding of flu and pneumonia will restart. It's like watching The Big Bang Theory or The In-Betweeners, where each episode is branded completely differently, but the storyline is practically identical to the last one. While many will fall for this same trick, just like they did last year, like a dog that still falls for the fake ball and then hide behind the hand trick, you know that one. Not everyone is falling for it, and the narrative is only hanging by a thread, so they need to distract us. Dominic Cummings, former advisor to the Prime Minister, has stolen the headlines in the UK this week for his admissions regarding the government's handling of the pandemic. All smoke and mirrors, of course. All that really came out of this is, well, one, he's a psycho, saying that they should have jabbed people earlier with this untested gene therapy, and if they died, just give the family £1 million or whatever. That's not a normal thing to say, Dominic. That's not normal. But the main points are that Bill Gates fanboys, Witty and Valent, are great, and we should have locked down harder and sooner. A nice bit of predictive programming for the masses there. Many are now calling for the resignation of Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson. A tearful resignation followed by a lucrative book deal is not what should be happening to these people. They need to be held accountable by the population, and they will be. On the show today, we are joined by Save Our Rights UK founder Louise Crefeld. She's going to be talking to us about the ongoing court case between themselves and the UK government and the deeply sinister lengths that our so-called elected representatives are going to prevent a result that isn't in their favour. Musicians, Right Said Fred, have been a mainstay for the protest movement since the very beginning, and while many were falling by the wayside at the first whiff of reprisals to cries of "Man down!", Right Said Fred stood firm. I'll be talking to them about the growing movement, but also about the need for positivity as opposed to negativity, which is difficult. I know I'm negative a lot, but it is key if we want to manifest the reality we desire rather than the one we oppose. Lenny Marino, a rapper and entrepreneur, is coming on for the US. He's going to be talking to us about how COVID restrictions have destroyed the arts, but also how big business has thrived while small businesses have been decimated. All part of the plan, of course. Finally, we have Dr. Ben Tapper from West Omaha. Ben is my spirit animal, to be fair, and he's been rinsing government officials in the US over the COVID scam since the very beginning. Some of the videos went viral and they really are an absolute thing of beauty. First of all, Louise Crefeld. Hello, Louise. Thanks for talking to us again. Could you give us a quick summary of what these legal cases are?
So we have been brought in for protesting related charges. So there are charges for organising protests and then charges for attending the protests that we've organised as well. So for every protest, there's 2 charges.
So, okay. You just leave it with one with organising it, wouldn't you? If we were in a sane world, I think.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Like, I don't understand. Like, either you're an organizer or you're a participant, but they're trying to go for both, and it feels like they're just trying to have a backup. Except all of the participation ones, are null and void because you can only be charged for participating if you've already been given a direction by the police to leave on the day and then haven't followed it. But at no point was I given a direction to leave any of these events, so therefore they haven't followed their own rule of law to get to a point of enforcement. So they can't actually enforce any of the participation ones because there was no direction to leave.
So how does that work in terms of the case now then? So obviously the participation one, we'll just chuck that one out, we'll ignore that one. So in terms of the organisation, where do you stand with that now?
So there's 4 different ones. There is the 29th of August, 26th of September, 24th of October and the 28th of November. And so these were under kind of 4 different sets of legislation because obviously the legislation was changing all the time, which therefore makes it basically impossible to follow. So the 29th of August, the laws all changed the day before, and like it was impossible to adapt to the new laws. So there's that argument, but also there's no evidence of me organising that event because all they've got is that I was stood on stage, and so, and the evidence, the it's the emphasis is on them to prove anything. So they've got to prove that I was an organizer, and that, you know, we should have been able to follow law that had only changed the day before. 26th of September, 24th of October, there was a group decision that it would be best to try and follow the legislation so that we could at least get started and have the event, which meant putting in risk assessments. And therefore, in the evidence bundles, it says that we had permission from Westminster Council and the Metropolitan Police to go ahead. So to then charge us for doing what we'd been told and following legislation seems completely unjust.
Ridiculous.
And madness. And then the last one, you know, Article 7 of the Human Rights Act is there can be no punishment without law. And for law to be applicable, it has to be accessible and has to be easily understood. And that's our own measure. And for the 28th of November, I was getting conflicting advice from a top QC in London who was saying that there was still, like had previously been, an exemption for protests if you submit a risk assessment. So I wrote to the Metropolitan Police and said, because they were putting out tweets saying they were going to stop coaches and that anybody who came was going to get arrested. And obviously the 28th of November was absolute carnage, and they did stop coaches and everything else like that. It was mayhem. And I didn't want that for the movement. I didn't want that for the people. And it really hindered our efforts over the winter because of people were scared. Yeah. So I really wanted to avoid that. So I wrote to them in the morning, and he said, there's no exemption per se, as in you can go ahead, but there is an exemption from the £10,000 fine, which is the enforcement action. So if there's an exemption from the enforcement, then surely there's an exemption, and therefore that means it can go ahead. And if there's an exemption from enforcement, why am I in court again? But the fact that I'm getting conflicting advice from two top people shows that this law and the legislation isn't accessible and easily understood. So if these top people can't understand it and agree, how is anybody else,
exactly,
like your average layperson?
Well, you look at that then, okay, so there's 8 charges then, so 4 of them for participating, you chuck them out immediately. The first one, you know, there's no evidence that you organised it, so we'll get rid of that. The second 2, you had permission, so we'll get rid of that. And then the final one, the legislation isn't written in such a way that anyone can understand it, including top-level barristers and, you know, QCs, whatever. Right, yeah. Done.
I know, right?
Let's all go to the pub.
But exactly, but what they're going to do instead is they're going to drag it out. So, you know, we've got a case management hearing on the 1st of July, and then there'll be a second case management hearing, and then the trial date will be set, and the trial will probably be at least a week, but it depends on if they keep all 5 defendants together, because then it could be up to like 2 weeks. So this is going to be, you know, every day that there's like a case management hearing and stuff, that's a huge amount of legal fees, because not only do lawyers have to appear in court, they also have to do all the prep work. So, you know, it's a huge drain on resources, and it's just based on nonsense. You know, there is, so what I can see is that this is just an exercise to drain like all of us and our resources, to stress us out, take up our time, take up our energy, in the hope that it prevents us doing the actual work that we want to be doing. And I know for me that, you know, it really hindered me last week. I didn't manage to get anything done that I usually do for Save Our Rights, because I was so focused on the court case.
Of course. And it's kind of killing or attempting to kill morale as well, isn't it? Mm-hmm. A bit, and just kind of make you think, what's the point? And then also then you're an example to others that are like, oh, do you know what, I want to do it, but have you seen the hassle that Louise is going through? Oh, I don't fancy that. You know, so how are you funding it then? Because like you know, I'm fortunate enough to have not been in court, but I know that lawyers aren't cheap.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is something that I'm going to have to look at, because currently, you know, I only had to pay out a small amount for the first plea hearing, so we were able to fund that. But I've got to, once we go through and I'm going to fund the next one, and then we should have a better idea of how long the trial's going to be and how much it's going to cost. And then I'm going to have to decide what to do, because it's that thing of, you know, do I want to be, like, even if I could crowdfund it, do I feel like that's a good use of people's resource? Like, You know, I know people would probably be generous enough to help me crowdfund it, but you know, there's much better things that we could be spending money on, as far as I'm concerned, and that's where I'm frustrated. But like personally, I can't afford to pay for it, and I also am not entitled to legal aid. There is an element where you can potentially recoup the costs afterwards if you're found not guilty. So if the Crown drags you through all this, but I have to look into that more, and at the same time, you still need it up front in the first place.
Of
So
course.
it's a real problem. It's something that's caused me a real headache, and yeah, I'm not entirely sure how I am going to manage it, and that's one of the things they want to do, is put that pressure on you and make it really difficult.
Of course, and you're totally right as well. You could crowdfund. I think you'd quite comfortably crowdfund, you know, £40,000 or whatever. But you think, why would you want to give them £40,000? You could go out and feed how many homeless people with £40,000? I mean, obviously, we had a conversation a couple of days ago, and you were talking about bank accounts being frozen. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we came out of court, and like within a couple of hours, we got emails from two. We've got two different businesses that are involved in this movement. So we've got Save Our Rights UK, which is a non-profit limited company, that's obviously all about our human rights and campaigning and everything else like that. And then we've also got autarky.social, which is a social networking site, which is for free speech. There's no censorship. There's no your data's completely protected. There's no adverts and stuff like that. So we made that kind of to deal with the Facebook issue that we all encounter. So we have these two different companies. Both of them are financed in very different ways. Like the kind of financial activity on both bank accounts is very different. And within 2 hours, both of them got closure notices of coming out of court. And the only thing that joins them both is my name. And we've since obviously been trying to open new bank accounts, and autarky.social has a second director. And when we tried to open a bank account in my name for autarky, it didn't open. It couldn't open. But when we used this other director's name, we managed to open one, no problem. And we've still not managed to open a new one for Save Our Rights.
So you're blacklisted then. So we're like, you know, Chinese level of the social credit system, basically. You're persona non grata. So you're fighting a legal case against the government, which you need to fund, and then the government will, because these banks haven't just done that for a laugh, they will have done that on instruction. So they're doing that to stop you being able to fund your own defence. I mean, wow. I mean, I actually, believe it or not, I actually know people that think we still live in a free society, which is staggering to me. But in terms of freedom, obviously you're working on the medical freedom bill. How is that progressing?
Yeah, that's good. And obviously that's the key message of the march tomorrow, is that we are standing for our medical freedom and standing for people to have the right to say my body, my choice. You know, that was such a buzzword for like a buzz hashtag, and then people seem to have forgotten it. You know, it's like, no, your body's not your choice anymore. Like, you've got to do what we say. So we're going to just be reminding people that that's the message, and we're going to be really standing for medical freedom. There's going to be the opportunity for because obviously they always try and downplay the numbers. So there's going to be the opportunity for everyone to attend, to with just like a few clicks, to email Boris and tell him that they're at the protest and that they're standing for medical freedom. And, you know, we want him to have hundreds of thousands of emails when he goes in on Monday morning. Oh, it'll be Tuesday, won't it? Because it's bank holiday. And just be like, oh, right, okay. So that they know the public feeling on this matter and the sheer numbers of people that are out there. And we're going to have new letters for MPs as well going up hopefully today, and then we're doing bus tours the following weekend. So we'll be doing like a bus tour in London and one in Birmingham, doing outreach. So we're going to take a big double-decker bus around with banners and leaflets, and we're going to go to busy areas with a small team of about 30 people, and then get out and like engage with people.
Fantastic.
And then we've had about we've sent out hundreds and thousands of leaflets to people who are across the country who are willing. So they're giving out leaflets, stickers, business cards, and stuff to raise awareness, because this is what we need. We need people to be raising awareness and taking the action. So yeah, we're really working on just getting it out to the masses at the moment, and then getting the pressure behind it. And then we need to get some, you know, like, as much as I hate the mainstream media, we kind of need them to take note of it. But again, I feel like we're very much blacklisted when it comes to the press right now.
Yeah.
They've stopped mentioning the Save Our Rights name, including even my local paper. So here in Brighton, we've been doing protests since April 2020, and like I've been became a bit of a local person. So even like when I was arrested on the 28th of November in London, they reported on it here. I was like, oh, Louisa Greffield from Save Our Rights, that from Brighton, has been arrested in London. So they've talked about us a lot. They've rung me for quotes regularly whenever a new piece of COVID legislation comes out, to give like the opposing view. And then we had a protest here in I think it was just at the beginning of May. And they're like, oh, there was a protest. Don't know who it was organised by. Just won't say their name. And it's like, so they've just stopped mentioning the Save Our Rights name, and they knew it was me. They knew we were there, but the media has stopped naming any groups, because last year they were reporting and talking about what groups were there, and we kept growing, and they've realised that they were actually aiding us in some ways. So they've stopped mentioning any names of any groups, and that's a problem, because it was actually a really helpful way to reach a lot of new people.
Well, of course, if you're trying to paint people as far-right conspiracy theorist nutters, and then you quote the name Save Our Rights, I mean, it's a completely benign name in terms of any darkness or any sort of far-right connotations or anything. But also, it would make people think, well, what are they protesting for? Save our rights. Oh, do we need to save our rights? And you start start getting those cogs going in people's heads, which, like you say, people don't want that. But thank you very much for joining us again. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you hopefully on the streets of London tomorrow. I really hope it's just massive numbers, because we need to send a message for sure.
Absolutely. And yeah, I will see you tomorrow, Gareth. Thank you.
Magic. Last up, we have Dr. Ben Tapper of the Wellness Point in West Omaha, Nebraska. Having witnessed firsthand vaccine injuries at his clinic, Dr. Tapper has torn into Pfizer and other vaccine providers. Ben, thanks for coming on. What's been your experience, your personal experience of vaccine injuries and adverse reactions that you've seen?
Well, first of all, in practice, we've seen a lot of histories where I have patients with little ones get a vaccine, and they would have basically swelling of the lymph nodes. I've seen children go in for their 6-month shots, and they're hitting all their landmarks. Everything's great. Their neurological reflexes are great until they had that 6-month shot, and I've seen them, have neurological complications after the vaccine. I've met many families that have seen vaccine injuries. I've met families that have lost a child to a vaccine. Vaccine injuries are very real. They're not rare. What we're told and led to believe is that vaccines are just are vaccine injuries very rare, but really in the truth of things, vaccine injury is very real, and it's heartbreaking to see. And these parents are gaslighted, and they are censored when they have these stories, and they're told that these injuries are not correlated to the vaccine, and causation is not correlation, or correlation is not causation, and it's really criminal what's happening.
So I think vaccines are a strange thing for me, because it's one of those things that a lot of people just do. Yet, if you were going to buy a car, you would look into the manufacturer, you would look into their safety record, you would look into the efficiency of the car before you spend that money on it, and you're not even putting that in your body. And if the car's no good, you can send it back, which you can't take a vaccine out of your body again. So, they have insane criminal history, some of these companies. So say a company like Pfizer, what kind of criminal history does a company like that have? Well,
first of all, I love the illustration of the car seat. Would would you use a car seat that's never been safety tested, and there's no liability? And if it injured your child, I mean, you have no liability. You can't sue the manufacturer. I mean, the answer is no. And so these Pfizer and Moderna, AstraZeneca, they have a track record. They have a criminal track record. I mean, first of all, they are the most powerful industry in the world, first of all. And Pfizer, I mean, they have the largest fraudulent history in the world. I mean, they've paid out a $2.3 billion plea deal for misleading the public, bribing doctors, and they were fined $2.3 billion. And if you look at the history, their track record, it goes a mile long. And in the 1990s, they were involved in defective heart valves that led to a lot of deaths. They were sued. They were found guilty using Nigerian children, and they're in violation of the Nuremberg Code against their parents' will. I mean, they were testing pharmaceutical products on these children without the parents' consent. I mean, how evil can you be? And and if you look at in 2004, they were fined $430 million to settle criminal charges that against bribing doctors and I mean, if you just look at the track record of Pfizer, it's just a mile long. They're the most corrupt industry in the world. And then you have all these people say, "Hey, I got the Pfizer vaccine." It's all this virtue signaling going on.
Oh, don't get me started.
Right, but if you look at the history and the track record of these companies, they're just, they're not for the people, and they don't have our health in their number one interest, and that's the reality of things. I mean, Big Pharma does not have your health as their number one priority. It's their stockholders, and that's the reality.
Of course, and if people are healthy, they don't exist. They don't want healthy people.
Right.
They want sick people that they can treat symptoms. Are people in Nebraska kind of what's the vaccine uptake like there? Are people kind of turning their back on it a bit, fighting back, or is it kind of head down and get on with it?
I would feel like I feel like 60% of the people are getting the vaccination, and
Right.
about 40% are refusing it. But the problem is, if you go back in 2019, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, which is a subdivision of the CDC, they say basically they stated that they cannot force vaccinate, but they can force compliance. They stated that in 2019, prior to all this crony baloney stuff. They said they cannot force vaccinate, but they can force compliance. Well, how are they going to do that? They're going to leverage everything. They're the businesses. You're not going to be able to go back to work unless you have this vaccination. You're not going to earn a paycheck unless you have vaccination. You're not going to go back to school. They're leveraging the ability to function in society unless you have proof of this vaccine. And we saw this coming. We knew this was going to be the great agenda, basically, to roll this vaccine out and to leverage your ability to function in society, the ability to travel, to enter businesses. I mean, and it's criminal because in Nebraska, the mask mandate ended this week, which, hey, everybody's like, great. But then all of a sudden, all these businesses are still wearing the mask. They're forcing their employees. And now they're saying, hey, if you've had the vaccine, you can get back to normal life. But if you haven't had the vaccine, you need to practice social distancing if you're an employee here, and you have to wear the mask. Yeah, that's, and if you are listening, and if you are an employee that has an employer that is doing this, that's grounds for lawsuit. That is discrimination, and it's a violation of HIPAA, first of all, because they don't have the right to know your medical history. So we need to be very careful with that, but we need to stand our ground and sue these people because that's not right. And it's just really, really unfortunate.
I think from what I'm seeing, the United States, well, the whole world's a script. It's the same thing, but the kids are next. They're talking about it openly on the television here in the UK. I know they're doing that in the US as well, where the kids, they're going to start jabbing, which makes it sound playful, jabbing the kids from September here. But what advice would you give to parents? I mean, I'm a parent I've got a 2-year-old. Obviously, no one's going anywhere near my kid, but there's a lot of other parents that have full-time jobs and they have kids in school and they can't maybe afford the childcare and they can't homeschool because they need to work. And so there's, people feel like they're in a bind. What can parents do?
Well, first of all, this vaccine is approved for emergency use only. And, we need to understand what that really means. And this vaccine can only be on the market unless we're still in that emergency scenario. So the governments are saying we're still in an emergency situation, because if it wasn't an emergency, this vaccine, they cannot really leverage this vaccine unless we're in that emergency situation. But if you're going back to the school systems, I'm begging these parents, like, do your research, do your homework. I mean, you have the God-given right and freedom to decide what goes into your body and your child's body, not the government. And we need to stand our ground there. And you need to band together, find other like-minded parents, because they do exist. You need to find other like-minded parents, because a triple braided cord is much stronger than a single strain. So we need to band together, or we have strength in numbers. We need to find other like-minded parents and band together and fight against this tyranny, because this vaccine is causing more harm than good. This is the most dangerous vaccine that's ever hit the market, and we need to understand that the truth is on our side, especially when it comes to the science. The science is on our side, and to vaccinate the children against corona, that's absolutely the most idiotic thing I've ever heard, because these kids, the children aren't dying of COVID, and they're not even. You look at the history. It's like, what do they have? A 99.99999% chance of recovering from corona just fine without the vaccine. So why on earth would you use an experimental vaccine? And I think this is one giant lawsuit. I mean, you see the $2.3 billion plea deal that Pfizer paid out. I mean, this is the greatest crime against humanity on a global scale. So Pfizer, in my opinion, they need to be sued. I mean, every person on this planet needs to understand that Pfizer and AstraZeneca and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson, they are prone. I mean, they need to be sued, and they need to be out of business, because what they're doing is crimes against humanity. And this vaccine is the most harmful vaccine in the world. If you look at the VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, they have more reports and more injuries in the last year than I think ever since it started combined. And you look at the death rate, and only 1% of injuries are reported in VAERS. And so if you look at the track record and all the injuries combined in that system, they do not even compare to the last year.
Absolutely not. Thank you very much for talking to us, Ben, and thanks for everything that you're doing over there, alerting people to what's happening and fighting back. As I said earlier on the show, like, some of those videos that have gone viral of you holding politicians to account, they really are beautiful things, mate. And we thank you for that.
Well, thanks, brother. And the thing is, it's just, we need to speak our ground, and I'm just a chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska. I just, I don't do this for prosperity. I don't do this for publicity, but I do this because I understand that truth's on our side, and my convictions are greater than my complacency. And if you're listening, we need to stand our ground and go to those city councils, go to your school board meetings, and let your voices be heard, because we never know how far-reaching something we may think, say, or do today will affect the lives of millions tomorrow. Get out there and speak your voice, because your voice matters.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ben. Thank you very much, mate.
Thanks, brother.
Cheers.
To continue watching this episode of Right Now, please click on to iconic.com.